Hi students, it's Arthur. And drum roll please, we are on the last video in the interview series. And this one's going to be about preparing to close out strongly, and then we're going to move into the performance itself, the actual day of the interview. So we're still a little bit in the last stages of planning, and the area we're going to cover first in this video is to get ready for the end of interview questions. When we talked about interview questions, their last question is going to be, so what questions do you have for me? Or what questions do you have for us? So now is not the time to relax. Instead, you need to prepare to ask them some equally challenging questions. This is your opportunity to interview the interviewer. And normally, the expectation is that you'll be allowed 2 or 3 questions or so. And so let's ask the question of ourselves, how many should I ask and how many should I bring to the interview? Perhaps is a more interesting way to ask that question. So let's imagine that you bring your list of 3 or 4 questions, and guess what? The interviewer answered all of them in the conversation. Now what are you going to do? Or you were in a series of interviews with different people and they all gave you a chance to ask questions. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, do I ask them the same questions? Well, we don't want to be in the situation where we got to think about that and think of a question off the cuff. We'll look unprepared and unfamiliar. We'll probably look a little panicked as well if we have to think of a question on the spot. So my recommendation is let's avoid that entirely. I recommend that you develop a list of a minimum of 10 to 15 questions. Will you ever get to ask them? Never. But you know what? You're going to feel so much better having this list of questions ready to go when that happens, and you're just going to think to yourself, boy, I sure am glad I brought this long list of questions. In addition to that, some of these questions through the course of the interview, they may not be answered, but you may find you want to focus on a different set of questions based on the level of conversation. Having these extra questions and from different categories will really help you customize the questions in the best possible way. So what you want to do is, as the conversation goes, you may even highlight some of the questions as well to make sure that you ask them through this end of interview process. And ultimately, we want to make sure that we pick the 2 or 3 best questions based off the information that we've learned. And importantly, if you can create a couple of additional questions based on your active listening, such as, maybe what challenges did the person share? What responsibilities or KPIs did they mention that they want to focus on that you may want to bring back up? And then how did they react to your answers? Did they show particular interest or give you positive feedback to something that kind of resonated with them? So these are going to be sources of where you might guide your questions. But the categories that we talked about, we have starting and closing questions, and we'll go through those. But your other questions should come from areas like this: organization and the role and how it fits into the business itself and the environment, systems and procedures that you might be exposed to in the particular role. So if we're talking about a enterprise resource system and they use SAP, you may have a question based on that, particularly if you've already gotten some certifications or something that you want to highlight to them. And of course, culture. Now you got to be careful about how you ask the questions, and so there's a module resource document available that has end of interview questions. I think there's 45 or so in that list that'll give you an example of questions across various categories. When you are doing this, again, make sure they're relevant to the role and job as you're creating them. It should also reflect research that you have done. So a question could be phrased in such a way to demonstrate that you've done that. You might say, well, based on the research that I did on your organization, what I wanted to ask you is XXX. So you can use that, but definitely use the research to create better questions and make them specific and not general. Also, as I said, if you can use your active listening skills to create a couple of questions, that'll be great too. And generally, there are no questions And generally, we want to make sure that we're not asking questions that focus on us and what we get out of the role. So we don't want to ask questions around salary or benefits normally, although those questions might come up in a very final interview when you're the obvious candidate of choice. But still, we would want you to kind of steer clear of those questions under normal circumstances. So the next area that we're going to focus on is the starter. So the starter and closing questions are pretty straightforward, and our first starter has a purpose. So thank you for the time today shared. To make the best of our remaining time, may I ask how much time that we have left before your next commitment? This is a great question in the fact that the response might be an indicator of how well you've done. It might be direct feedback even that you'll get from this if you're not quite sure. So if you get a positive response with an open-ended time frame, things are probably looking pretty good. But it's not necessarily bad if they don't give you much time. They might actually have a next appointment in 10 minutes and they need to run to that appointment. But it could be based on the body language and how they answer it. It may tell you what you need to do and that you need to do a little bit of work to get to that next level. So the next question allows us to focus on how we covered the important requirements. So based on our discussion, how do you think my experience and skills match the requirements for this role? This can be a little bit of a nerve-wracking question because although we want feedback, we are concerned this one in this case might be negative, but we can use this to our advantage if that's the case. If they see a gap, we can take the opportunity to try to close that gap quickly with a response. So if they tell us something about, well, I'm not sure you have enough experience using SAP, and we really need that. You might be able to come up with an answer that might reduce his level of concern. You could talk about the fact that you're a person with a high level of initiative, and what you have been doing is you've been doing your own research and studying online with SAP, and you're hoping to get a certification. Now, don't lie to try to answer the question in a positive way. Just change it around to say, I'm willing to do this, to show your motivation and your ability to go get it. Remember, though, as you're going through these, make sure you listen to 100% of their answer and not think about your next question or not think about responding. Remember, listen to understand, not listen to respond. And then take notes to ensure understanding. This is going to be really important. You can't possibly remember everything that's going on, so always bring a notebook with you and take copious notes through the interview process. If they've identified a potential weakness or created an opportunity for you to reinforce your qualifications or experience, take the time to do so. But again, conciseness is important. For these situations, if you're going to reply to a response, maximum 1 to 2 minutes to respond to their answer. If not, you're not going to reply, just acknowledge their answer and move on to your next question. And a real strong way to continue to build rapport, even at the end of the process, is to use their first name occasionally during the discussion to reinforce that level of rapport you've built during the interview. Your closing is going to be equally important. Now, we're going to stop just a little bit short of asking for the job. Some people suggest you should do this, but I don't agree with that strategy. It will hopefully, though, allow for immediate feedback where you might be able to try to recover your position if you find that there might be a gap. If it doesn't go well, don't worry about it. Now you know, and you know that's the feedback you were looking for. Even if it's not positive, you can recover, prep yourself for the next opportunity, and just move on. Let's move to the day before the actual interview or your audition. It's too late to do any more deep research, and now it's really just about getting everything in place, literally and emotionally. It really is important that you kind of get yourself in a good frame of mind, and you need to take the last 2 days of the process to really get yourself there. Practice your scripts, do things to kind of reduce your level of stress. Hopefully, again, the preparation is there, so that should reduce it naturally. And for phone and video, you want to make sure that on the day of, that you target to start 5 to 10 minutes early. In fact, I would say that you need to make sure that you plan the hour before your interview you're going to use to kind of not really meditate, but do things that will bring you and calm you down and bring you to the right level of emotional stability, so to speak, that you need going in there. And then kind of get yourself geared up, get yourself amped up in that 5 to 10 minutes ahead of time to make sure that you're going to greet them with positivity, with energy, with enthusiasm. In person, similarly, we're going to get things ready the day before. We talked about 2 days before getting your clothes ready. So we're just going to make sure we're going to prepare our look, make sure all the things are there, particularly if we're going to be bringing any accessories with us or anything that we're going to want to bring to the interview. We want to make sure all of this stuff is pulled together. And make sure, of course, that you have the address and the contact info. That's really important, just in case you run into traffic or you get lost somehow, that you can use your GPS to figure that out. And then this is just a list of potential things you could bring as well in a portfolio or bag, just to have a few things that you might need. You may need none of these, but if you do happen to need a hairbrush because it's a really windy, rainy day and you had to run from the car to the door of the building and it kind of ruined your look, these things would be certainly handy to have, don't you think? And then once you start thinking about the day of exactly, obviously you want to make sure you target at least 30 minutes early in case of any traffic or other issues. And the 30 minutes is a pretty safe one generally. GPS, thankfully, and most of them give you a real-time estimate on the amount of time it'll take to get there. Honestly, don't push it. 30 minutes, plan it. That way you can kind of get there and you don't have to feel any kind of nerves or anxiousness. And as we've talked about before, every interaction with the organization is an interview. So greet your receptionist with energy and enthusiasm, and then greet your interviewers with energy and enthusiasm. Now it's on to the performance. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do to help you here. This part really is up to you. But hopefully you can bring the energy and the enthusiasm. The whole point of all of this is leading up to the actual performance, but it is up to you to deliver on the day. And I know that's a lot of pressure for you, but hopefully we've prepared you well enough and this is not going to be a daunting task and you're ready to go because you're excited about the job, you're enthusiastic about the role and the company, and you're excited about meeting the people. That's the key. At the end of the interview, this is the time to close out with your strong list of questions. So we've talked about creating or curating and preparing that list, and hopefully you found an opportunity to create some new ones on the fly using your active listening skills during the course of the interview. Here, now it's about reinforcing or sharing our continued interest and our desire to move forward to the next step. Now, if for some reason you decide that this isn't for you, it's up to you whether you want to divulge that information now. I think it's best to be transparent about these things. So if you do see enough red flags in here, I would use the opportunity at the end to talk through those and see if there might be some gap analysis that you and the interviewer can do. But generally, it's probably just best to move on. But before you leave, make sure you take time to thank everybody with really good energy, using their first names preferably, and even if you can, use something from the day, from the conversation that you had with them that you may want to leave them with. Such as, Arthur, it was really great to meet you today, and I really appreciated our conversation when you really talked about the project management process here at ABC Company. So thank you so much for that, and I really look forward to talking about our next step together, right? That's a decent way of closing out and thanking someone graciously with good energy. Obviously, make sure you get contact information from everyone you meet because you're going to use this for follow-up and the thank you note. And ultimately, what you're going to want to do is finally finish the day out by taking good notes on the key information you've learned. And I highly recommend that you take, as soon as you leave the interview, go back to your car or after you shut down your video session, and literally at that point, do a brain dump. Dump everything into your notes that you thought about and make sure that you feel really comfortable that everything that you were trying to remember coming from the interview that you can actually remember. You will definitely leak out the rest of the information over the course of time. So taking notes is really, really important. You can even record those notes using a voice recorder app on your phone. What I want to leave you with is the results of a survey of CEOs who have interviewed literally thousands of candidates in their careers and what separates the best from the rest. I tried to put together my own list, but I happened to find this online, and I think it really speaks very succinctly and to the point of what hiring managers are looking for in their candidates. So first of all, the things that we pay attention to, things that definitely leave an impression on hiring managers, is how you greet them and leave them. Body language, how confident are you? Do you display charisma? And then do you leave them with something to think about? Great questions and a sterling performance, something that makes them remember you. You also want to show how passionate you are. Now, obviously, you don't want to go overboard with this. This often translates, though, into hard work, innovation, dealing with challenges successfully, and ultimately loyalty, right? So we look for passion from individuals, and hopefully you've displayed that and they think that you're going to be a good fit for their organization. We also want to know that you're self-aware and flexible. Here we want people that are open to continuous learning. They're not arrogant, inflexible, kind of stuck in their own ways. So we want people that have a continuous improvement mindset. They understand their own struggles and how they've adapted to deal with that. So adaptability is something that we can display very readily in this. And then also vision to make changes to oneself first, right? We're going to fix ourselves before we're going to fix everything else around us. Those are really great attributes to display. Of course, respect. We work with people, so treating them right is the key to success through great social connection and collaboration. Obviously, it starts with how you treat the first person you meet and the last person you see. And one great example of respect is, are you on time and ready to start the interview when you're supposed to? I also talked about being respectful to everyone you meet in the interview process, even if it's just the receptionist or the janitor in the building. We also want to know that you're comfortable. And what we mean by that, there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And you know what? Candidates can't be comfortable in the interview if they haven't done their research, understand what that means, and the role's place in the business. Making strong connections through eye contact is another way to showing, you have good confidence in yourself. The one question that does stand out for most people is how you handle the "what is your weakness" question. Again, we're not looking for the perfect person. That's, we always joke about looking for the unicorn or the purple unicorn. Honestly, though, we're looking for is someone that's going to be a good fit in the organization. Someone who can take risks, make mistakes, admit them, and also accept constructive criticism to improve. So knowing that you can do it to yourself means that you likely can do it for the project or for the tangible things in the business that need improvement. And finally, specificity. This one's really important. We want to see succinct yet thoughtful answers that demonstrate results over generalized or theoretical answers. Here, the specificity really demonstrates that you can go out and get the work done and motivate others to do the same. So all of these things, think about how you approach the situation, developing your answers, and obviously your attitude and behavior during the interview should leave behind a very positive impression in these areas. Now that the interview is over, we still have a lot of work to do. So we talked about the thank you note. A thank you note is considered by some people as old school, and some stats back that up. Believe it or not, studies suggest that up to 3/4 of job seekers do actually not send a thank you note, which is kind of crazy. However, we recommend that you do so, and of course you do so quickly, ideally by the end of the day of your interview. And we would also like to see those notes customized, not a general note. Please mention them by name, send them individually if you possibly can. And then ideally lead with something memorable from the conversation so that they remember you as well. Clearly, grammar and spelling and structure is important. So use Grammarly or another similar tool to write that thank you note for you. You can always use AI if you're struggling to come up with language, but there's good resources in the module resources. You can go take a look at the thank you note information there. There's templates, examples, and more background as to how to write a good thank you note. So take a look at all of those resources. Continuing along this thought process, one thing I wanted to mention is we talked about 3/4 of people not sending in a thank you note. But 90% of hiring managers say thanks, being thanked, leaves a very positive impression. And nearly 70% of human resources leaders say no thank you note puts the candidate at risk. What this really comes down to is we're going to be talking to some really great candidates. You're going to want to stand out. And of course, stand out for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And not sending a thank you note very well could send out the wrong message, that you're not that interested in the role, quite frankly. If I have two candidates that I think are equally qualified, one sends me a thank you note, the other does not, well, that might be the tiebreaker that makes or breaks you from receiving that job offer. So make sure you get this right and make sure you send a thank you note. In addition to that, networking is also possible with these folks that you meet. You can send out a LinkedIn connection, thanking them again in the invitation to connect. Don't be too surprised, though, if they don't connect with you or it takes them a while to connect with you, particularly if you do not get the job. So don't get too hung up over that. People feel awkward about accepting, and let them feel awkward and not accept. As I said, don't let that bother you. Now, with respect to follow-up, if you don't hear from them after the interview, don't assume the worst. That's what most people do. They expect an answer, they expect it quickly, and quite frankly, this is not the only thing these people are doing in their business. In fact, they're doing their day jobs, and interviewing is something they really don't want to do unless they really have to do it. But, so people are busy, and they may be interviewing more people for this role. People may be traveling. It could be month end, which pulls people, especially leaders, back into the business to do the month end reporting. And there are lots of challenges on people's time. So what I recommend is kind of a nice midpoint between kind of being aggressive and being passive, which is the rule of threes in this example. So what I suggest is if you don't hear from them within 3 business days, send a follow-up email. If no response happens, you wait 3 more business days, and then you're going to send a second email following up. The second email should be different from the first one, and you may even say that I am following up on my initial note that I sent on May 15th. No contact again, wait 3 more business days, and then in my opinion, you need to be very proactive here, and you actually need to pick up the phone and call somebody. Call your HR contact, call whoever was organizing and coordinating all of this activity. It could be an internal or an external recruiter, for example, or contact the hiring manager directly. So that's the thing. If you don't actually connect with them, it is at that point okay to send that third and final email following up. In these notes, all of them are going to be succinct, no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs of 2 to 3 sentences each. And of course, you still can use all of this opportunity to hopefully build rapport and so that you can connect to these people so you can add them to your professional network. At the end of this, and you still do not get feedback after that third communication, move on. Honestly, don't sweat it. It's very normal for companies not to give you feedback. It's very normal for them to ghost you, essentially. One of the reasons that companies don't provide feedback is that they're afraid that the information might be misconstrued or certainly used against them in a discrimination type case. So most companies will give you very generic or vanilla feedback or no feedback at all, which is so frustrating as a candidate. I get that. It's just not practical. And in some cases, companies have a policy of providing feedback at all, so it may not be a surprise. Again, just move on. And that's the end of the final video in our interview series. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you about job offers next.